I want to keep talking about our, even the word prayer or worship has felt too small for me. And so I think that the heart of where I want to lead us is just to the presence of God, that whatever that means, whatever happens when you're there, that's it. That's prayer. That's the awakening of the inner life. To come alive, to come awake to the presence of God. And we've talked about, the first week we talked about like the delivery of your whole self to God. That's worship. And last week I talked about our rules and our techniques and our things we trust in rather than the presence of God. And today I think we have to talk about our relationship to our sin, because I think our relationship to our sin is a great barrier to intimacy with God. It's not just that the sin itself is a barrier. We know that. But it's the way that we experience our sins, the way we define it, it's the way we understand it, the way we relate to our sin that I think keeps us from God. There is this war which has raged since the first human society until now. It's a war so common, so ubiquitous, so familiar, so insidious to us that we take part in it from the time we're very, very young children until our dying breath. It's a war that results in every kind of horror and violence, and it's also a war which rages entirely inside of us. William Faulkner, in his Nobel Prize speech, said that actually the most important subject in literature is what he called the human heart in conflict with itself. We all relate to it. Paul is putting a certain sort of duality of language onto that struggle, which I think everyone knows and everyone has experienced for all time. And he's saying, the language that he's putting on top of that struggle is the language of spirit and flesh, which is language he's borrowing from Jesus. Spirit and flesh. Jesus said the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. This he said incidentally about our inability to pray for long periods of time. This is when he's in Gethsemane and he's praying, and he comes in a moment of great vulnerability. He says to his disciples, after he's crying and anguishing over this thing which he must go do, and he turns around to see his three closest friends asleep. And it almost feels like he's hurt. And he says to them, you remember what some of the most cutting words in the Bible? He says to them, could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? And then he says those words, the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. This is our inner struggle, however you define it, however you describe it, between two parts of ourselves, spirit and flesh. Now, even this word sinful nature, which gets translated or rendered here sinful nature, is really the word flesh. It's the word carnality. It's not, sinful nature, I think, is maybe an attempt to sort of give this theological dimension, but the truth is the word that Paul is using there is my flesh, in my body. Who will save me from this flesh? That's what he's saying. Who will save me from this body that is subject to death? Spirit and flesh. And even this beginning was saying, I know the law is spiritual. Listen, there's a difference between flesh and spirit, and the law is in the side of spirit. There's good and there's evil. There's that sort of light and darkness, this cosmic duality, this struggle, and there's the law is on the side of good. It's a good thing. And then he says, but I'm unspiritual. It's probably something what you experienced in Thanksgiving, when you looked at that extra piece of pumpkin pie and you just thought, I want to eat it, and I don't want to eat it. Did anyone eat more food than you wanted to on Thanksgiving? Anyone? Just own it. Some of you guys you're not confessing today fully. You have to, these are easy. You have to put the hand up for these. The harder ones are later. I'm sitting there. They made these I don't even know what they were. They were like heavenly, pumpkin-y little squares with Cool Whip on top. And I'm like, no, I don't want one of those. I'm not going to eat one of those. And so I ate one. And then something happened inside me where I just thought, well, I already did it. I already ate one. So I didn't want to eat one and I already ate one. So I might as well eat two. So I ate two. And this is, I mean, it's a silly example of this dark struggle of what I want and what I want, what I want and what I don't want. Our sin, this is a way you could almost describe sin, a way you could almost define sin. It is the things we want but we don't want. That is sin. It's what you want but you don't want it. The things we love that we actually hate. And our duplicitous relationship with desire itself. And we vacillate. We can't even settle on a definition of desire. We can't settle on it. I wake up in the morning and I think, my desire is not to run, not to exercise. And yet I have this desire to be healthy and to run. And I'm not sure, it depends on the moment, what I sort of latch onto and I say, this is my desire. It's as if the pronoun floats. I say there is desire to run, to not run, and I choose where to put the my today. My desire is to run. My desire is not to run. It's just whatever I choose that day, where I put myself, where I connect myself to that desire. And of course, if I just look at the breadth of my life, I realize I actually desire both things. We are of two minds, aren't we? We want to be faithful and we want to cheat. We want to serve and we want to give up. We want to keep loving and we want to walk away. We want to forgive and we want revenge. We have a saying, we say sometimes that person is their own worst enemy. Have you ever heard that saying? That person is their own worst enemy. We are all our own worst enemy. Paul is strangely admitting, I am my own worst enemy. He's saying that. The passage hinges on this idea, I do not understand what I do and what a wretched man I am. And it almost inevitably leads us to this statement, who will save me? And that's important because part of what he's saying is, I cannot save myself. It's perhaps the most important line in the whole text. Who will save me? It means so much. It means I cannot save myself. Karl Barth said, defeating your own sin is like pulling yourself out of a swamp by your own hair. It cannot be done. There's no leverage. And knowing that, somehow knowing that, is a seed of hope to overcoming. And truthfully, there is a futility to this argument. There's a futility to experience, the way we experience our relationship with sin. It feels futile. The longer you struggle with a certain sin or the longer you struggle with sin itself, it can almost come to the point where what is the point? Why even do this? Why even try? And if in the end there's nothing I can really do about it, then I totally begin to understand why human beings gravitate towards things like self-help and self-mastery and mythical ideas like the unicorn of the mind, which is like willpower, or the triumph of the human spirit. Who will save me? I think I see three basic strategies for how people deal with this conflict inside us. The first is that some keep fighting. This is probably you, probably most of the people in the room. We keep striving. We keep thinking, I can do this. I can overcome this. We're just a little more disciplined. Just this time I'll get through it. This time I won't. I'll set up different practices, or I'll get some accountability, or I'll pray a little more, or I'll read my Bible more, or I'll talk to the right people, or I'll confess to the right right people. Maybe if I just do these things, I'll finally get mastery or victory over that sin. We keep striving. We try mental tricks. We try self-discipline, and we're determined to find a way to win this battle. That's what a lot of us do. That's the first technique. The second is to deny that there's any evil at all. This is maybe the second most common thing I see, which is people they just decide, eventually at some point in their life, they look at the things that they do that are wrong and they decide, I don't actually think those things are wrong anymore. That's one way to just wipe out all your sin deficit at one time, is to just say that evil is good. It's to actually just say, well, I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that. And that's actually probably the simplest way to deal with your sin. It's a lie, it's an illusion, but it's a way. It's a way, obviously, I know a lot of people do it. They just decide. I remember I had a guy for a few years who used to come to my house church. He was a very old guy, and I think his life was in shambles. He had no relationships with his kids anymore. He had no really long-standing relationships, and he used to say, I have no regrets in my life. And I was always puzzled by that, baffled by him. And I would press him and say, none, you have no regrets. There's nothing that you look back and say, I should not have done that. That was a problem. He said, no, what's the point? As if he had sort of made some kind of decision that if I were to look at the breadth and depth of my sin and the struggle of that, I would crumble under the weight of it. And so what I've decided to do is to look at the breadth of my life and say all of it was fine. And it all led me to where I am now, and it's fine. That's one trick, that's one strategy, to deny the fight exists at all. And third is, and some of us do this, is to give in to the futility of it, to allow that final judgment of condemnation to define us, to simply say, I guess I'm just a bad person. To struggle with a sin so long and to finally say, well, I'm not going to say it isn't a sin because I know it is a sin. I'm not going to keep fighting because what's the point? I just lose anyway. So I think what I'll do is I'll just decide, you know what? I guess I'm just a bad person. So be it. I guess I'm just a pervert. I'm just ruthless. I'm just greedy. I'm just selfish. I'm just an addict. That's what I am. What are you going to do? And so these are our choices. Lie and call ourselves good no matter what we do. Lie and call ourselves fully evil no matter what we dream of being. Or keep fighting that futile fight, believing one day we will win and overcome this struggle, which we have made almost no progress on so far. That we will make ourselves into the person we think we can be. And each is right and each is wrong in its own way. And maybe there's something here for us this morning. Maybe there is another way to look at ourselves, to look at our sin, and to look at God. And I think, at least for me, there's something in here which will completely change your life forever if you embrace it. But there are three bombshells in this text, three ideas which I think are pretty ridiculously important. Two of which you probably have heard or have some sense of, and one I'm almost sure you haven't. The first is that Paul recognizes that he's still in a battle. And why is that important? It's important because this is the Apostle Paul, you guys. This is like the best Christian ever. I mean, if you're going to say, does anyone feel they're more spiritual or more connected to God than the Apostle Paul? Is there anyone here that feels that way? And by the way, if you raise your hand, de facto you are not, because what the heck, you're so proud. You already completely disqualified yourself. I mean, when we, who gets to write that much of Scripture? And this is a guy who's like leading the vanguard of mission and sacrifice and seriously, Apostle Paul, devoted guy. Are we in agreement? And yet he's saying to us in the present tense, this is his struggle. It's very ninth grade of him. This sort of like, I want to do it, but I don't want to do it, and I hate it, but I do it anyway. It's like, really? This is the best I can hope for? This is my future? As a missionary person, I want to be like the Apostle Paul and just sit there and be like, the thing I want to do, I don't do. The thing I hate, that's what I do. This is my dream come true. This is my mentor, this is something. This has been actually troubling. This text has been troubling for some commentators and Christians Throughout history, they want to say, no, Paul's talking about his past, but he isn't. This is all present tense. It's all present tense. I mean, this is the same guy that says, I am in Christ. I am a new creation. And he's still saying, I have this battle, which I never seem to win. Still, this war rages inside him. Listen, guys, this is really important because sin does not go away because we're close to God. We want to believe that if I just prayed more, if I just did more ministry, or if I just followed some sort of set of steps that I would stop sinning, and it isn't true. The best among us still have this battle because it's attached somehow to our nature. As long as we're in this flesh, it will be there, wanting attention, driving a wedge between us and God. For a long time in this country, there was a stream of Christianity which was called holiness. It was a group of people that actually started to believe that the primary thing that God does in the life of those that surrender themselves to Him is that He makes you holy. He makes you like Him. And there's very, very important depth to that idea, to that truth. And yet some people took it so far as to believe that actually the goal in this life was to become sinless, that actually a person could in this lifetime become a person who does not sin. And that is, for many people, an achievable goal, even early on in your process of sanctification. I've only ever met 3 people in my life that believe this. The 3 people in my life that would look me in the eye and say, I no longer sin. Has anyone ever met a person like that? I've met a few people like that. There was actually a group of people who used to come when I was a student at the University of Florida. They would come. There was this little band, this little traveling band of weirdos that would come to the University of Florida. The main dude, who I don't even know if he's alive anymore, but is a guy called Brother Jed. And he was married to Sister Cindy, and Brother Jed and Sister Cindy would bring their little entourage to campus, and they would preach. Now, I would say the gospel, but I can't say the gospel because gospel means good news, and they didn't preach good news, they preached bad news, and I don't know what the word is for bad news, but that's what they preached, was the bad news. They would literally waggle their finger at people walking by, some girl in a miniskirt or something, and be like, whore, slut, and that's what they would just say, sinner, idolater, whatever. They would just say these things to people, and I was like, wow. So the Christians, invariably, every time they would come out, the Christians would go and try to reason with them, and try to say, please, you're messing this up for us. You're a bad person. You're not actually preaching the gospel. Now, these people, I remember having a conversation with him where he told me that he no longer sinned. I was like, bro, you're sinning right now. Like, you're just a walking ball of wickedness. Like, everything that comes out of your mouth. I mean, it's not even just like this is debatable. I remember thinking too, man, if this is the finished life, like if this is the fully sanctified life, I want to quit the game now. You know what I'm saying? If this is what you end up being, if this is where you end up one day, like when you finally no longer sin, you get to be like this person. I just thought, man, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. And of course, if heaven is full of people like that, I mean, who wants to go there? But I'm pretty sure it isn't, and I could maybe make an argument for that. And the truth is, all they were doing, all those people with extreme kind of holiness bent, all they're doing is pretending. It's just another strategy to deal with their own sin. It's another way to relate to their own sin. It's called denial. Because I promise you, they're just as sinful. The only difference is they're just playing the game, pretending that they weren't. And by the way, if you do that, if you pretend you're not sinning, which all of us do that to a point, don't we? I mean, all of us take certain things that we're doing which aren't godly, which aren't right, which aren't good, and we pretend like they are. We all have a little Brother Jed or Sister Cindy in us. Self-righteous, sure that we're not doing anything wrong. And I promise, if you deny the sin in your life, that only makes you a worse sinner. And Paul admits this. And it seems important. He admits his struggle. But somehow it's okay. Somehow it's in Scripture. Somehow it's important. Somehow it's connected or related to our freedom. I think perhaps the greatest barrier to our intimacy with God, that appetite for Him, the desire to be close to Him, to be in His presence, is our dysfunctional relationship with our sin. that it becomes for us, our sin becomes for us, and the way that we relate to our sin becomes for us this massive barrier, this hindrance. Like I either think of myself as a great sinner, and then I don't want to be in the presence of God. I can't even imagine. Why would I want to? Or he wouldn't want me anyway. Or I deny my sin, and all that does is distance God as well because of my pride and my self-assurance. The second sort of big bombshell in this text is what was brought up earlier. It's Paul redefining himself, his true self, as someone who loves God. Now, I know I'm going to fail this morning. I just admit that. I am going to fail to communicate the depth of this, the radical nature of this idea. In particular, this idea grabbed a hold of my heart this summer, and I'm still trying to appropriate it, trying to wrestle with it, trying to fully understand it. He is saying, listen to what he's saying. He's saying on the one hand, he says twice this exact phrase, it is no longer I myself who do it, but sin living in me. What is he doing there? It is no longer I who do it, he said, but sin living in me that does it. He's being very clear by doing this disassociation with sin and himself, what I would consider his true self. Now, apparently, when people, there are many things that happen to the human body when your brain has a stroke, like an aphasia. Part of your brain goes dark, and typically what it'll do is affect the opposite side of your body as the hemisphere where the stroke happens. One of the things I understand that can happen to a person that has a stroke, that has been the victim of a stroke, is they get what's called alien hand syndrome. I love that. I want you to think about that for a second. Alien hand syndrome means that you don't have control anymore on your hand. It just does things. So someone walks by, you slap them on the rear. That wasn't me. That was my hand. This happens to people. You're talking to a friend, you slap them. I'm so sorry. You don't understand. It's not me. It's the hand. It's my hand. I can't control my hand. This actually happens where a person's hand just does whatever it wants, has a mind of its own. Alien hand syndrome. You tell your hand, don't do that. You tell your hand, pick that up. It won't. It knocks it over. It does something else. It won't obey you. This idea of alien hand is exactly the way that Paul is talking about his sin. It just does what it wants. I can't. What am I supposed to do? You just slapped me in the face. It wasn't me. It was my hand. I know it's your hand. It's connected to your body, and that's what he's saying. It's a member of my body, but it does what it wants. It seems to have its own motivation. It sounds like he's not taking responsibility. If one of my kids said to me, I'm like, did you do it? Yeah, I did. I think my kids might have alien hand syndrome as well, by the way, because especially my boys, because they're always hitting each other, and then I'll be like, and then one of them, he hit me, and I'll say to the one that hit the one, like 6 seconds ago, did you hit him? No, I did not hit him. And so you have to get very specific in this situation. You have to say something like this: did your hand touch his face? Yes. But I didn't hit him. If someone said to me, it wasn't me. Oh, it wasn't you, then it was someone else. No, I mean, it was me, but it wasn't me. So someone else did it. No, I did it, but it wasn't me. Excuse me? I think either you need to get yourself checked out, or this is like some strong blaming flow. You're not taking responsibility for yourself. This feels wrong at every level. It feels like he's not owning his sin, but on the other hand, he is. On the other hand, he's saying, I do it. I don't want to do it, but I do it. He's saying, I do it, but it's not really me who does it. Wait, what? Sounds like he's not taking responsibility, not owning it, but actually what he's doing, I wonder if what he's doing is just not allowing the sin that he does to define him. And I think this is so amazing. It's so radical, it just might be the key to a life of sustained and joyful prayer. Surrendering our relationship to our sin, separating ourselves from our sin. This is what he's doing. He's disassociating himself from the sin that he does, that he admits he does. Yeah, I did it. But he's somehow separating it from what I would call his true self or his true face. I think sometimes we don't pray, we don't draw near to God because we see ourselves as our sin. That our sin is us. And we know sin can't stand in the presence of God, so we can't stand in the presence of God. Guys, listen to me. From God to the Apostle Paul to me, to you this morning, you are not your sin. You are not your sin. For me, this is so liberating. We don't draw near to God because we see ourselves as our sin, like it's still attached to us, like it's personal to us. It is us. But guys, this is what the cross has done. It has separated us from our sin. As far as the east is from the west, so I have separated you from your sin. You say, but Brian, it's still at work in me. Yes, it is still at work in you. Yes, you're still doing it, but you have been separated from it. Paul's revolution here is to say, it is not me, but it is sin that is still living and working in me. So the work then in our battle with sin is to not let sin define us, but to treat it with disgust. Now, if you ever look into kind of the research of disgust, I read a book recently called Unclean, which is entirely about the psychology of disgust. There are certain things that repel us, that repulse us, and why that some things do and why other things don't is actually a matter for the mind. It's a matter of psychology, not so much biology. Sometimes it's rooted in that, but it's more a matter of psychology. I'll give you an example. If right now, all of you right now have in your mouth spit, saliva. Agreed? It's all there. All of you have it. It's right there. I know it's a weird thing to admit and to recognize, but right now in your mouth you have some spit. If I were to give you a cup and you were to spit that spit into your cup, how would you feel about re-drinking it? This is the reflex of disgust. This is the reflex of, now, think about that for a second. It's in your mouth right now and you have no problem with it. 1 second later, it goes in the cup, and it's like, oh my God, never in a million years would I ever put that in my mouth. You see the problem? That's a reflex of disgust. Now, this is what happens to us emotionally, mentally. When something is in us, when something is a part of us, when something is us, that spit is in your mouth, it's no problem. It's not considered a foreign entity. It's not a pathogen. It's not a problem. It's part of you. But the second it leaves you, the second it is no longer a part of your body, it becomes disgusting. It might as well be someone else's spit, because no way you're putting that in your mouth, even though it was just in your mouth and you had no problem with it. This is the psychology of disgust. It is the phenomenon of something leaving us, something being externalized, no longer being a part of us, and us seeing it for what it really is. And there are people that I know who seem at home in the place of prayer. They seem comfortable in the presence of God. And it's not because they don't know themselves to be sinners. They do. It's just that somehow their sin doesn't define them. I'm going to put it this way. They've picked a side. In that great battle in our minds, in our hearts, in our flesh and our spirit, between these two great desires, these pools of desires that we have, they've chosen a side. And honestly, some of us have not done that. We're neutral on the matter. Sometimes I want this, sometimes I want that, and I'm leaving it open. The question of our true self is a question of choosing sides. We have both of these kinds of desires, that's clear. They both come from inside us, that's clear. But the question that we have to ask and answer is, what is the deeper desire? Which one should rule the other? Which one will you own and say, that is me? And which one will you externalize and say, that is not me? This is important. This is what Paul is giving us. Paul is saying that his sin is not his true face. It's not his true self. It's not his ultimate desire. I'm telling you, at least for me personally, pressing into that has been so liberating to finally be able to say, not with pride or hubris, God, my heart is for you. In spite of these things I choose, my heart is for you. There's always the greater and the lesser desire, and he's naming his. And that's what we have to do. When we just leave it ambiguous, we're neutral on the question. We lose. We are lost. But he's saying, no. There is a greater and lesser desire, and the greater desire is this. The deeper desire is this. He uses the word inner, like the deepest place of me, the truest part of me, loves God, delights in God. So the one must rule the other. The one defines us, and the other defies us. The one is me, and the other is the enemy of me. To be able to say with total honesty that I love Jesus. I want his kingdom to come. My sin nature, my flesh, does not. And it works against me and my true self. This is so liberating. I think it was around the 15th century in Europe that people started doing what's called masquerade balls. Masquerades were the masquerade ball was a part of a season called Carnival. And during that season, which is interesting, by the way, masquerade, of course, means to wear a mask, to walk about in someone else's face, in someone else's costume. And even the word carnival, its root is flesh, carne. And even the expression, even today, all over the world, there are carnivals. If you've ever been to or heard of carnival, it is the great expression, the great flamboyant celebration of the flesh. It is about putting on another face so that you can do what you would not normally do in your true face. It has often been a celebration of sin. Because why? Because I want to do this, but I know I shouldn't do it. So if I wear a mask, it will allow me to do the thing, the baser desire that I have. The celebration of the flesh. Incidentally, Jesus, the harshest word he ever leveled toward human beings was the word hypocrite. It's a word he chose that he plucked from Greek theater. It means one who wears a mask. And we do that still. We have our masquerades, our carnivals. I started watching the X-Files again. Do you remember the X-Files? By the way, that was a really long time ago, apparently, because when you start at season 1, it's like 1992, and there's no such thing as cell phones, and it's crazy, man. And the hair is amazing, and the clothes are amazing. And anyway, I started watching it with Eve, because Eve and Luke a little bit. So we started watching the X-Files. And then, it's funny when you watch something again, maybe for the second time. I don't know that I ever saw all the episodes, but kind of going back, you just pay attention to things you normally wouldn't pay attention to. Now, if you don't remember, there's two characters, they're FBI agents, and they investigate the paranormal. So it could be aliens, it could be just sort of strange phenomenon, whatever. And so they're always, Dana Scully is the female lead character, and she's a doctor, and so she's always doing autopsies on like alien bodies with evil death spores inside them, or strange fluke worms or whatever. It's gross. And so she's always doing autopsies on things. Like almost every episode she does an autopsy. Now what I found interesting is that I'm sitting there watching an alien autopsy, and she doesn't wear a surgical mask. Now I just think this is a bad idea. But not only is she not wearing a surgical mask, but she always has eye goggles on, Which I can't understand. Like, yeah, protect your eyes. That's important. But not your mouth? Like, when the spores come shooting out of the alien life form body and hit you in the mouth, that's not going to be a problem? So I think this is ridiculous. Seriously. Who wrote this show that they're like, she definitely needs to have eye protection. She always has eye protection, but never cover her nose and mouth? Come on, seriously? But then it occurs to me, and you could ask Eve, because I'm saying this as I watch the show. Then it occurs to me that yeah, you can't, the problem is, this is theater. The problem is it's a TV show. And some directors may be like, okay, for reality, she should probably have a surgical mask on. And somebody else, the director's like, no, she can't wear a surgical mask, because if she wears a mask, we won't be able to see her face. If we can't see her face, no one's going to watch this show. You can't know a person, you can't know a character if you can't see their face. And then it occurs to me that even that idea, that I'm watching her face, like they've gone to great lengths even to go against reality, to take off a surgical mask so that we can see her face, so we can know her, so we can understand her, so we can know what's going on inside her head or her heart. But the truth is, even what I'm watching is a mask, because she's an actor. Who is she really? I have no idea. And it occurs to me that what they know is that you can't wear a mask and want people to know this character. It's not possible. But this is what we do. We all choose to wear masks. And the tragedy is we can't know each other ever because of it. You wouldn't go on a job interview with a surgical mask on, would you? You wouldn't go on a job interview with sunglasses. Try that. Let's try it. Go to your next job interview and wear dark sunglasses. Do you think you will get the job? Some of you are unsure of it. Like, I don't know, it seems cool. Like, maybe I'll try that. And the guy interviewing will be like, wow, this person is very cool and iconoclastic wearing their sunglasses. No, they will not hire you. It depends where you are. On your head works for JP. That's a style. That's okay. But if you wear them on your eyes, why? Because you're covering up something. It's like obviously a mask. I mean, I want to just imagine you're on a date, first date, and you wear a surgical mask. How's that going to go for you? I mean, it can be interpreted one of two ways. One is like you are contagious somehow, which is why you were wearing a mask, in which case that's not going to help you with her, is it? Ding dong. Or you're saying she's somehow gross and contagious, and so you're wearing a mask. That's not going to help you either. Masks are barriers between us knowing each other. We know that. And masks take all kinds of shapes and sizes. And here's the thing. Listen to what Paul is saying. That thing we do is not actually the thing we really want to do. That thing we do is not really the thing we want to do. Think about that. In other words, the sin we engage in is a mask that we wear. Always. If he's right, if your true self loves God, knows God, wants God, delights in God, and you choose something that is opposite of that, that is the enemy of that, that thing is a mask hiding your true self. Hiding you to the world, hiding you to God, hiding you to yourself. I've probably worn a lot of masks in my life, but I would have to say, when I really do the deep work of introspection, I would have to say that my most common mask I wear is anger. And I can remember it starting very young for me. Probably the most potent example that I can think of is when I used to play high school tennis. I was always getting angry on the court. Now, tennis is a very sort of vulnerable sport because it's just you. There's no one to blame but you. When a shot goes awry or you miss something or you try something you shouldn't try or you hit the net at the tape or the ball goes out or it goes long or whatever, that's on you. There's no one else. So you're sort of exposed when you mess up. Now, I don't know what exactly happened. Maybe the last couple years in high school, it became cool in our high school to come watch tennis matches. Now, you wouldn't think that would be a cool thing to watch, but there was usually 100 kids that would come out. Maybe a few of the popular kids started liking tennis or something. So they would always come to our matches, and we werenn't good. Our team wasn't good. We didn't win a lot of matches. We lost a lot. Now, to make matters worse, I was playing the wrong seed. So the way it works in high school tennis is that the top 5 players play the top 5 players from the other school. They call those seeds. So you have the number 1 seed, the number 2 seed, all the way down to 5, and you then play your corresponding player from the other school. Now, the problem was, Mike Patz was on my team. Now, you have to understand, Mike is very competitive. I probably played Mike 1,000 times in tennis, and I beat him in tennis once. So in 1,000 times, I beat him once. Now, that's not to say we weren't very close. We were. Actually, we're very, very equally matched. Difference is, Mike is a winner. So he has to win. Always at all costs. And I'm not going to say I'm a loser. That's not what I'm saying. I just prefer to think of myself as a second placer. I'm happier, more comfortable with second place. So this kind of little social contract that he and I had, that he was always going to win every match. Now, sometimes I would dare to get close to winning. Now, you have to understand, we would always be very close. He never beat me by much. It was always very close, but he always won. He found a way to win, partly because he was underhanded. He was kind of nasty. And he would always play games with my head. If I started doing well, he would always come up the net. He would stop the game, come up the net, and be like, "Brian, you are serving so good today. Like, your first serve just can't miss today." And I'm like, "I hate you so much." The burning of 1,000 suns, because I'll go back and I'll hit that next serve right into the net just because he said that. He knew how to get in my head every single time. So anyway, he always won. I beat him one time. I think it was raining. Whatever, something happened. By the way, I just want to point this out, and yes, I'm a little hurt. The one time I beat him in a set, he couldn't just leave it. He couldn't just let it go and we go home and be like, "Good job, you won the day, Brian." He was like, "Best 2 out of 3." And then he had to win the next 2 just so he could leave having beat me for the day. So I just want to point that out. Anyway, so I've only beaten him once. Then it comes time for the seeding matches. So we're going to play each other. Everybody on the team is going to play each other, see who's best. And I beat Mike. Come on. So now you have to understand how a competitive person thinks. He claims to this day he did not throw that match, but here's the thing. Now he gets to play 4th seed, I play 3rd seed, which means he has a higher chance of winning the matches that he plays. Do you understand? Well, I'm always going to play the 3rd best player on everybody's team. He's going to play the 4th best player. I think in his mind he just thinks that gives him a better chance to have a better record, so he lets me win. So I play 3rd seed most of that year, and I got eviscerated by everyone. Everyone's 3rd best player was always better than me, and so I almost always got beat. I remember dealing with that. There's all these people, so now it's popular. Everyone's there. Everyone's watching, and you're all alone on that court, exposed. Every mistake you made is exposed. It's very vulnerable. And the way I dealt with that was anger. I would shout or scream. I actually would buy the cheapest tennis rackets. At Costco, they had these $13 Wilson rackets, and I would buy 5 or 6 at a time so that I could break them. So I had a bag of rackets, and I would miss a shot, lose a game, whatever, go off to the corner and smash a racket. Now, here's the thing. The reason why I did that, I see it now, I probably even saw it then, is I was embarrassed. I didn't want to seem like I wasn't good. But the truth is, I missed that shot all the time. But I wanted to act like I didn't. It was a mask. Anger is a mask you wear to pretend something is true that isn't true. To say, "I can't believe this. How did I lose?" Well, because you lose every time, Brian. That's how you lost. You lost because you're not that good at tennis. That's why you lost. "I double faulted." Why? How? Because you double fault at least twice a game. That's what you do. But you can't own that. You can't admit it. So anger became a mask that I'd wear. It allowed me to pretend. The tragedy is, of course, that when we wear these masks, when we play these games, when we pretend, most people don't buy it. It wasn't like people were going, "Can you believe Brian lost today? This is crazy. He normally always makes those shots. This is weird. We should all go break a tennis racket right now because this is crazy." No one is buying it anyway. Possibly even sadder than that is if by some strange chance you are able to wear a mask and people love it and people love you. The saddest thing of all is that they're not even really loving you, they're loving your mask. So even when it works, which it rarely does, In the end, you're isolated by it, and you have the sting of the knowledge that they don't actually like you. They only like your mask. And I want to say it again, and I want you to really hear me. The sin we engage in, the lesser desires we pursue are masks that we wear, obscuring our true face. You are not your sin. It is a mask you wear. And your true face, if you are a believer, if you have surrendered your life to Jesus, delights in the law of God. Finally, there is this strange application. Paul acknowledges the battle. He redefines himself and his true face, disassociating himself from his sin. And finally, he surrenders to the grace of God, taking his pure heart and his broken flesh into the presence of God. Sin for Paul becomes another reason to be with God, not a reason to walk away. From time to time, someone will tell me that they're not interested in God anymore. Someone that used to walk with the Lord or someone that used to be part of our community, and they just sort of fade. It doesn't happen often, but once in a while, this happens. And as they fade away from God, I often want to ask why. I try to dig in deeper. And sometimes they'll say something like, I just don't know that I believe that anymore. Again, it's very rare, but when it does happen, it always seems to me that when I dig below the surface of that answer, I realize that there's always some mistress, some affair of the heart, drawing them away from Jesus. It isn't actually that they've looked at Jesus and found him wanting, that they've actually looked deeply into the eyes and the face of the God who loves them. It isn't actually that they've found that God isn't real anymore. It's that they actually have given themselves to something else. And they know, or at least they feel, they cannot have both. And so with the line drawn in the sand, they have to choose, and that which is not Jesus has a greater draw on their heart, and so they tell themselves God is not real. They tell themselves that God is not important to them anymore, that there is no truth to find. But it's just because they're entangled in sin. Most of you know that for years I lived in intentional community. A group of us shared the same home, multi-family home. Still today, there are people that live close and around us, but then particularly for about, maybe 10 or 12 years, we lived in such a way that our lives, we were right on top of each other. And every single week, we would sit together with no agenda. Every Sunday at 9 p.m., we'd sit together in a room with no agenda and just be in each other's presence. I cannot stress that more. There were times where we just actually sat there like Quakers waiting. And usually Jeremy or Jason would make an inappropriate joke and that would begin laughter. I would say that probably 50% of what we did all those nights for 10 years was laugh. By the way, there's something very spiritual about that. We would go on and on and on. It's like you pull a cord on one of those chatty dolls, and they just da-da-da-da-da. That's what the guys would just tell inappropriate joke after inappropriate joke. The women would shake their heads, but laugh a little. That's just sort of how it went. That's how they just, and we just kept going. Nothing could stop it. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes we cried. Sometimes we dealt with deep, painful things. But always we were there for each other. It was an exercise in presence. One of the things we would do occasionally, not often, but once in a while, is we would do a thing we called the hot seat, where we would actually literally take a seat, a chair, stick it in the middle of the room, and somebody would sit in that chair. And while sitting in that chair, everyone in the room would go around and say what they thought their sin was. Now, I want you to just try to imagine that experience. And we're not just talking about the obvious things. What we really wanted to get at were the blind spots, the deep and abiding things that you cannot see about yourself, but you really, really, really want to know. This is a hard thing to find. It's hard to find people that you can do this with, because most people, when they want to push that button, actually get into that really tender space where you know you're probably wrong, but you don't want to hear it from anybody. It's hard to find people that you could actually listen to that. So we would do this occasionally, stick somebody in the middle, in the hot seat, and just say, okay, give it to me. Tell me the truth. Tell me the truth. And I know it sounds horrible. Does it sound horrible? To some maybe it does, to some it doesn't. But for the most part, it was actually pretty gentle. It always was harder to sort of build up the courage to do it than it was to actually go through it. It had a lot of value. First of all, probably it had value because knowing where you come up short, at least in the eyes of those who know you best, is a really important thing. It's a very valuable thing. To be able to see, I know for me at least, I never want to be surprised by my own sinfulness. I always want to know the struggles I face. And I never want someone else, I never want other people to know more about my own waywardness than I know. And unfortunately, that happens because we often are blind to certain things that we do. And this is a great value that friends can give us. And that's probably why we did it. That probably was the root reason, was like, tell me the truth about me so I can know it. Give it to me straight. Don't hold back. Tell me the truth. But you know what I think maybe was even more important and more profound in that experience? Was what it was like to feel that most unusual feeling of being both exposed and totally loved at the same time. It's just not something that human beings have a lot of experience in. So on the one hand, to be like, here goes my mask, it's off. Here's my true face. And it isn't pretty. And yet to feel in that moment of exposure, totally, utterly loved, accepted. It wasn't like, that's what you realize. It's like nobody ran out of the room screaming. No one said, you know what, and you're out of here. We don't want to be, we reject you. But to actually feel like at the end of it, man, these people still love me. They're still with me. Guys, I think that's why we're so fascinated by counseling. I think we love the idea of counseling or therapy because we literally are willing to pay someone to just sit there so we can take off our mask and they accept us. We're paying them. They can't run off screaming. They can't tell anyone. They can't judge us. They just get to listen. We'll pay someone top dollar to have that experience. Can I just be with somebody where I can take off my mask and I know you won't tell anyone? And you'll actually see me for who I am. And you won't hate me. You won't reject me. How much does that cost? $200 an hour? Just tell me. I'll pay it. Just to have that. I'm going to invite up the musicians so I can finish. You don't have to wear a mask to be with God. You can't wear a mask and be in the presence of God. You know that. That's why we don't go. That's why we're afraid to acknowledge His presence, to step into that place of presence, because we're afraid that He'll see past our mask. Yes, He will. That is part of what keeps us from entering into that place of prayer in His presence. But this is His delight. He delights in seeing you for who you are and forgiving you and loving you and accepting you. You come to Him as needy. This is what Paul realizes, that actually for him, his sin is not a reason to run from God. His sin becomes a reason to run to God. What if instead of looking at it, I'm blowing it and I made this mistake again, so I can't turn to God. I'm running away from God. What if instead you actually looked at your sin, however great or small it is from day to day, and you said, that's a reason for me to run into the presence of God. If you knew that it was His delight to forgive you. The psalmist said, how shall I repay the Lord for all His kindness to me? Now there's a question. How should I repay the Lord for all of His kindness to me? And so what do we think? We think, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to be a good person. I'm I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to do a lot of ministry. I'm going to go out and try to make God proud, or I'm going to go out and try to make God love me, or I'm going to go out and try to make God see that I'm really thankful for him loving me, for him forgiving me, for him dying on a cross for me. I'm going to go out and do something, strive, somehow win this battle with sin so that he sees that I really appreciate what he's done. And we fail, and we fail, and we fail, and we fail, and we keep putting on our masks and keep putting on our masks. How shall I repay? This is what the psalmist said. How shall I repay the Lord for all of his kindness to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation. How do I repay God? You don't repay God. How do you repay God for his kindness? You empty out your cup and you lift it up and you say, can I have some more? Because this is what God does. This is what he delights in. Saving, rescuing, forgiving, and loving broken people. How do you repay God? You ask him to keep loving you, keep forgiving you. You ask him for more kindness. This is the basis for our intimacy with him. To come as sinners each day in need of grace. To be in constant confession and absolution. To fail and receive mercy 100, 1,000 times a day. And in that exchange to remember who we are and what we really want and who he is and who he has promised that we will become. And in Paul's other letter to say, to boldly approach the throne of grace. In this life, this is our essential relationship with God because we are still sinning. We are still battling this battle. And to know that our true heart is for God means that my heart races back to the presence of God when the enemy wins one round. To race back into the presence of God because I know that my true self wants to be with God. My true face wants to be face to face with God. But also to know that because I have sinned, I must run to the one who has mercy for me. I'm just going to put my cards on the table here. The whole reason why I wanted to do this series was because I think that we're supposed to take some kind of step forward as a community in our life of devotion and prayer. And I don't know exactly how to say it or teach it or draw you into it. All I know to do is to say that the presence of God awaits you. He longs to be with you. He desires to be with you. And I don't want to teach on prayer so that you know more about prayer. If that's what happens here, then we have all failed miserably. Instead, we must do this. We must press in to him. And so really the whole reason why we wanted to do this was because on December 12th, we're going to take a time. I already said this to some of them. I think I said it last week. We're going to take a 12-hour period from sunrise to sunset. And we're going to choose this room. And we're going to fill it with live kind of worship music. We're going to have places around the room where ordinary people are praying. Listen, I said this before. I want to say it again. There are no experts in prayer. There will not be specialists to pray for your deliverance or to pray for your healing or to pray for some kind of breakthrough, but there will be ordinary people. We may ask you actually to be one of those people who are praying for something extraordinary, because what brings a miracle is not the person praying, but the person prayed to. What actually brings the miraculous is not you or I being good at prayer. It actually just means about ushering in the actual person of God into that one situation. So I want everybody to feel like they can both come and sit in the presence of God, but also be there to pray for others, for healing, for breakthrough, for the miraculous. I think God wants to do something. What if all of us in one day took a step forward in our experience of the presence of God? If you've spent hours in the presence of God before, what if you spent one more than you normally do? If you've never, ever, even for a few minutes, stayed close in the presence of God, then come. I don't care how long you stay. Some of you might want to stay the whole entire day. Some may only come for a short period of time. Come for as many, but what if we all did that? And this is why I wanted to talk about this for this day, for the 12th. Those 12 hours on that day, God wants to do something in our lives. And I don't know. I don't even know what you're supposed to do when you get there. I don't know if you're supposed to sing or have some kind of breakthrough, and I don't know what you're supposed to say or pray or intercede or whatever. I honestly don't think it matters. We create these checklists in prayer, and it misses the point completely. Come into his presence, and whatever you do when you get there is going to be okay with us. When we were kids, we would all play hide and seek, and the goal of hide and seek is not really to hide, it is to be found. I can remember one time playing in my house, and I was so small that I was able to get into the laundry chute, the laundry pantry thing, and I got underneath all the clothes, and no one ever found me. It's a dreadful experience. I think I fell asleep. And a long time after the game was over, I was still in the laundry chute. Kids had moved on, done other things. We hide, we wear these masks, and they betray our true self, our true desire, which is to know God. We think we're running from God because we think we want to run from God. We think we want to hide, but we don't. We want to be found. And he's looking. He's seeking.